Hello, and welcome to AV Cyberactive. Today we're going to discuss Kerberos Protocol on how it is used. The protocol was named after the character Kerberos from Greek mythology, the ferocious three-headed guard of dogs. It was developed by MIT Massachusetts Institute of Technology in the year 1988. Kerberos builds on symmetric key cryptography and requires a trusted third party, and optionally may use public key cryptography during certain phases of its authentication. And Kerberos uses UDP port 88 by default. Now, as you probably know, Kerberos is a native authentication protocol in Active Directory, so it's used by Windows networks everywhere, but it's surprising how few people really know how the protocol really works. Let's dive in. So in any authentication situation, you really have the three different parties that are involved. The first is the client. Now, sometimes this client computer, but more frequently is an actual user who's sitting at the computer and is trying to access resources. Then there's the resource itself that they are trying to access. In this example, it is some files on the file server. And then there's the KDC, the Key Distribution Center. Now, in an Active Directory environment or network, that's an Active Directory controller. And this is the center that brings everybody together. In the KDC, we have two more servers running, namely authentication servers and ticket granting server. I will touch them when I explain the Kerberos process. Now, interestingly, in Kerberos, there is no communication between the resource and the KDC. And there doesn't need to be any, as the client actually takes the majority of the processing burden in Kerberos, which kind of distributes the workload across the network, but it does it so in a way that's secure and trustworthy. Now, it all starts with the client attempts to actually log on to the network. Here's how it works. The client constructs the authenticator. Now that's a special little package that says here's who I claim to be and some other information including the date and time right now. Those authenticators are only good for a certain period of time, and that way they can't be captured and thus cannot be replayed back to the network by an attacker. So this will represent the authenticator. Now, a portion of this unencrypted a message like the username and some more details. That way this gets sent off to the KDC or the domain controller, and the KDC can see who's trying to authenticate. But another portion of this is unencrypted using the user's password. So the pink lock will represent the user's password, which is known to the user, and the user's password has been used as an encryption key here. Now you see, this is a very important concept because this emphasizes that the fact that Kerberos doesn't transmit your password across the network, it uses it as a shared secret. Now the shared secret simply means that when this thing is sent off to domain controller or the KDC, the domain controller can open it up and can see that it's in clear text and say that it's okay. It's okay for the person who claims it to be, and I'm going to go through my database and look up what I think their password is and see if I can decrypt the authenticator. If the KDC can't decrypt, well, this was clearly encrypted with a password other than the one I know, so this user isn't who they say they are. But if KDC can decrypt it, then the user must be who they say they are because they got the correct password. So from this point onwards, KDC don't need the authenticator anymore. It actually can just completely go away from now. Instead, a special server in KDC called the Authentication Server is going to create a ticket granting ticket, or a TGT. Now, I, as the domain controller, have my own encryption key that I'm going to use to encrypt a portion of this TGT. And I've already gone through the laborious process of looking up for this user, making sure they are who they say they are. KDC will save all this information in here, but it's going to encrypt it using a key that only KDC knows. Then it's going to be transmit the whole thing back to the client, and they are going to store it in a special area of memory called the Kerberos tray. Now that's the area of the memory that cannot be copied or written out to a disk, and it always lives in the memory. That way, if the computer crashes, this information hasn't been saved anywhere persistent. Okay, now that the client is logged on and they are ready to go, now the client needs something on the file server, so my computer looks up at my Kerberos tray and says, well, I don't have a ticket for the file server. Now we are going to go back to the keyed KDC, and what they are going to do is send this ticket granting ticket along with the request that, hey, I need a ticket for the file server. The key distribution center, or the KDC, or the domain controller in this case, does not have to go through to look up my information again. It simply uses its key to decrypt the TGT that it gave me earlier, if you remember. If it decrypts it successfully, then it knows that this is the information it generated itself previously. Now these ticket granting tickets are usually good for about 8 hours by default, so periodically they will have to be destroyed and renewed. That way, domain controller gets an opportunity to revalidate client's identity, but it doesn't have to do that every time, which saves it some efforts. So the client actually keeps a copy of this in its Kerberos tray, and it's sent a copy of the domain controller every time. The domain controller knows who I am now and can thus generate a ticket. Now here's the cool thing. Because the file server is also a domain member and domain controller has its logon password as well, which it uses to decrypt this ticket, and so there's no communication to the file server itself. Instead, there's another special server in the KDC or the domain controller called the ticket granting server, or the TGS, and generates another ticket. This ticket is created by the ticket granting server and is given to the client, who stores it in the Kerberos tray now for the next 8 hours while the ticket is still good. Anytime the client needs to access something off the file server, all it has to do is to create a copy of the ticket and it sends it across to the file server. Now the file server says, well, I have no idea who you are. I have never seen you before. I'm going to use my password, which I know, to try to decrypt this ticket. If I'm able to do this, then the ticket must have been generated by the KDC, because that's the only other party that knows my password and tells me that the file server that this is a legitimate ticket, and I'm going to go ahead and accept that. I'll open it up and that'll tell me your username and what groups you're a member of, and I'll use that information to decide what you're allowed to access. And every time you come back to me, Mr. Client, you're going to have to resend me a copy of this certificate. That way the file server don't have to store all this garbage information in the memory, because the file server is working with hundreds of potentially thousands of users. If it had to keep all those tickets, it would be a huge overhead for the file server. So this is how the authentication works. The client goes to the KDC to get the ticket, and then it stores them and presents them to the file server, and that's how the whole Kerberos protocol really works. Now, talking about the attacks on the Kerberos protocol, now with the ease of the SSO technology comes some easy to attack targets, one of which is called Kerberos statting. Kerberos statting is a post-compromise attack technique for cracking passwords associated with service accounts in Microsoft Active Directory environment. In this, the attacker impersonates the user account with a special service principal (SPN) and requests service-related tickets. They then crack the password hash linked to that service account, log on with the plain text credentials, and advance to the next step of the attack. Some measurement techniques that you can do is implementing the use of MFA, multi-factor authentication, and using complex passwords as some way of preventing Kerberos statting. Now let me know in the comments if you're interested in me making a detailed video on how entire Kerberos statting is done and Kerberos authentication protocol is being abused. I'll honor the request if I get 10 likes on this video. I hope this has been an informative session for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing this. Also share this video with your family and friends. I thank you all for watching the video. Bye for now.